Hey, everybody, this is Mike Anderson. Welcome to my very first podcast, On the Road with Mike Anderson, serving up some collision advice. So, man, I am so pumped today to be with you, as well as I have a special co-host guest with me, and that is my teammate, Sheryl Driggers. Sheryl, I want to make sure that you're on and everybody can hear you and see you. All right, I'm not seeing Sheryl.
I can see you. Hey, Mike.
Hey, there we go, Sheryl. Hey, just make sure you're good. You can hear us and see us good, Sheryl.
Yes, I've got you loud and clear. Welcome. I'm excited to be part of your first podcast.
All right. So, Tracy, I can't really hear right here on my sound with my speakers. So let me just check this out. I appreciate everybody's patience. Sheryl, can you just talk to me one more time, please?
Hey, Mr. Mike Anderson, can you hear me?
All right, Tracy, I don't have any sound over here. One moment, everybody. I apologize. Little technical issues as we work through this. So my apologies. Okay, Sheryl, let's try it one more time, please.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Mike Anderson, can you hear me?
All right. My apologies, everybody. We're having a few technical issues here. Let me see if I can get some sound up here for a moment. So I apologize.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
One moment, everybody. My apologies. All right. Sheryl, can you try it for me one more time?
How about now, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, we are good to go. So, hey, everybody, my apologies. We'll try to turn that down just a little bit, Tracy. Maybe we can keep the reverb down. So, hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining me today for On the Road with Mike Anderson, serving up some collision advice. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, Troy, if you could go ahead and share the first slide, please, I would be so grateful. I wanted to start off by sharing with all of you what the average severity is by state. So we at Collision Advice, we actually compile data from a variety of different sources across the United States. Tracy, if we could just go full screen on that, on what you're sharing there real quick versus the regular slides there. So everybody, again, we're kind of figuring this out there. So what we're sharing with you here is what the average severity was for each state in the United States of America for the last 4 years. Now, it's really, really important you understand this is for all insurance claims, DRP and non-DRP. Again, I'm going to say that again, DRP and non-DRP. And what I did is I just picked out a couple states for us to look at. First of all, Rhode Island had the highest severity in the United States of America in 2024, right? An average severity of $6,969. Wyoming, number 2. Wyoming was coming in at $6,617. Colorado, number 3, coming in at $6,555. And the great state of Nebraska coming in at number 4 is $6,356. Now, let's talk about the 4 lowest states in the United States of America. Vermont, the lowest. Vermont, the average severity, the only state in the United States of America with an average severity of $3,528. Coming in at number 49 was the state of Maine, $4,220. Coming in at number 48, Delaware, $4,260. And oh my God, it breaks my heart. My home state of Virginia, $4,426, which totally just appalls me because Virginia has one of the highest cost of livings in the entire United States of America. Now, one of the things that I share with a lot of people is that lots of sales cover lots of sins. A lot of people, they base their success on their average severity, what they're getting paid, like $300,000 a month in sales is their goal. And if they hit that, they're really, really happy, right? Or if your goal's $400,000 a month in sales and you hit that, you're happy. Let me just tell you this right now, ladies and gentlemen. I mean this in love, but let me tell you right now that if you are basing your success on just a gross dollar sales amount, you are going to have a false sense of security. And what I'm telling you should look at, yes, you should look at average severity. Yes, you should look at what your, gross sales are per month. But what else you should be looking at is average labor hours, body, frame, paint, and mechanical. Now, let me share a slide here with you very quickly, and I'm going to try to see if I can advance the slides, but it's not advancing, Tracy, so maybe you can actually hit the connect button there for me. All right, let's look at this right here, still on the severity trace. Now we're on body labor hours. All right, and let's just look at this, right? So I picked out 4 states. Actually, let me go back one slide. I picked out 4 states, right? We looked at California, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Virginia, right? These are the 4 states that I just want to focus on today, just using as examples. If you look at the state of California, their average body labor hours went down from 19.2 down to 19 hours. So yes, the average severity in the state of California went up, but their average body labor hours per estimate went down in 2024. Let's look at the state of New Jersey. Their average body labor hours went up an hour and a half, 1.5 hours. Now, Rhode Island, again, number 1 in severity, but one of the reasons why is because their average body labor hours per estimate, 25.7. Again, the highest in the United States. Virginia, your average body labor hours dropped by 0.1. Your average body labors dropped by 0.1. Now, let's go here and let's look at paint labor hours, all right? State of California, average paint labor hours dropped from 9.6 down to 9.5. So California, your body labor hours dropped, your paint labor hours dropped. Let's look at New Jersey. New Jersey blew it up out of the water, right? Your average paint labor hours went from 10.6 up to 11.3. All right. Rhode Island, average paint labor hours increased from 11.8 to 12.9. In the state of Virginia, again, you're breaking my heart here, guys. Your average paint labor hours dropped from 9.4 to 9.2. Right now, I'm going to tell you right now, I see some of the best shops that are writing repair plans / estimates, and they're averaging 15 to 20 hours of labor per estimate. I can tell you our team at Collision Advice wrote an estimate to replace a quarter panel recently on a specific vehicle, and we came in at around 36 hours of paint labor when you look at, all the well burn damage and second color setup and all the non-included operations. But again, ladies and gentlemen, as we start to look at severity went up in 2 of these 4 states. I'm using examples, but their average body and paint labor hours went down. That is a problem. Let's look at frame labor hours. State of California, it looks like it was flat. New Jersey, frame labor hours, flat. Rhode Island increased from 0.5 to 0.8. Virginia stayed flat. And let's look last but not least at mechanical labor hours. Mechanical labor hours for the state of California only went up 0.1. New Jersey, average mechanical labor hours increased by 0.2. Rhode Island increased by 0.2. Virginia stayed flat. Hey, now can I share some insights with you? I mean this in love. Right? But I'm going to tell you right now, when I see the average mechanical labor hours per estimate, it leads me to believe that collision repairs are not performing safe and proper repairs. And I mean this in love. I mean, you look at the average Subaru, the average Nissan, Toyota, Lexus, right? They were General Motors product. They require safety inspections where you may have to take and remove a dash and inspect the dash gear. You may have to inspect the seat belts. You may have to take and remove the airbags and inspect them, remove the steering column and inspect it. And then you got battery support for scanning. You got inspecting seat belts. Ladies and gentlemen, you got removing electronics for for welding, excuse me. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, when I see the average mechanical labor hours are only averaging like 1.2 to 1.7 average per estimate, it concerns me that as an industry, we're missing mechanical labor operations, not in an intent to price gouge anybody or overcharge, but we're missing out on operations that are required for safe and proper repairing. This is very, very, very concerning to me. So let's just go ahead and let's look at the 4 states that I picked today: California, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Virginia. First of all, the state of California. Average severity, $5,616 in 2024. That their severity increased by $192 from 2023 to 2024. But their body labor hours per estimate decreased. Paint labor hours per estimate decreased. frame labor flat, mechanical labor up 0.1. Their labor hours or units, whatever term you want to use, actually decreased. Let's look at the state of New Jersey. Average severity increased by $566. Body labor improved by 0.5, labor hours, units, whatever term you want to use. Paint labor by 0.7. Frame, flat, mechanical labor 0.2. So again, labor units increased by 1.4. But if you took that times the average labor rate in the state of New Jersey, I'm sure that doesn't equal $566. Let's look at Rhode Island. $6,969 severity. Increased $853. But ladies and gentlemen, when we look at this, the average labor hours for the state of Rhode Island increased 4.2. Now let's talk about Virginia. By God, Virginia, you're breaking my heart. You're breaking my heart here, Virginia. Average severity dropped. Body labor hours or units decreased per estimate. Paint labor, your total labor, units decreased and your severity decreased. Let me go back to my original statement. Lots of sales cover lots of sins. Listen, you cannot base your success alone on just what your average severity is. You need to also be looking at your average labor hours by category, body, frame, paint, and mechanical, when you're looking and monitoring your repair planning or estimate quality, ladies and gentlemen. You absolutely have to monitor this. Now, as I started looking at some of these trends in regards to which states had the highest severity, and we saw, ladies and gentlemen, that Rhode Island had the highest severity in the United States of America in 2024. Matter of fact, if you look at this article right here from Property Casualty 360, this is an insurance magazine, August 28, 2024. In their magazine, they said most expensive states for car accident claims, and Rhode Island came in at number 1, right? So listen, I can tell you the data that we're sharing with you is absolutely accurate because of the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, the data we're sharing includes both DRP and non-DRP claims, right? And Rhode Island, number 1 in severity. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, I want to go ahead and we can quit sharing the screen right now, Troy. And what I want to do is I want to introduce a special guest of mine today, and that is Randy Bottella, who is the owner and manager of Reliable Collision Repair in West Warwick, Rhode Island. Now, Randy has over 25 years of experience in the repair industry. He's the president and past vice president of the Autobody Association of Rhode Island. He's also the chairman of the Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation Autobody Licensing Advisory Board. And honestly, I will tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, why I believe that Rhode Island has the highest severity and highest labor hours in every category in the United States of America. I will tell you why, ladies and gentlemen. I believe it's because of their legislation. It is because of their legislation. And that's why I've invited today my very first guest of my very first podcast, On the Road with Mike Anderson, serving up some collision advice, powered by Autobody News. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to please welcome Randy Bottella. Randy, thanks so much for joining me today, my brother.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
So, Randy, Rhode Island, number one of all the states, United States, for highest severity. Personally, I believe that your legislation has a lot to do with that. So can you just share with me and any listeners right now, and anybody that's going to be viewing this after the fact, let's talk a little bit about your legislation. You guys rolled some new legislation out. Was it the end of last year or first of this year?
It was last year. We've collectively had legislation changes going on almost every year for easily over the last 15 years. But the thing that you're speaking to is specifically going to be what passed a year ago.
Awesome. So let me ask you this question. First of all, let's talk about some of the things in your legislation. Let's talk about OEM parts versus aftermarket. Share with me what your legislation says.
Okay. Quite some time ago, we had legislation passed that made it illegal for an insurance company to refuse to use OEM parts on a vehicle that was 48 months or newer. And in
48 months, that's 4 years, right? 4 years,
right.
My math's right, 4 years.
Right. From the date of production. Then last year, there was another change that was made that raised it to 70 months as long as they have the request from the consumer. So if the consumer's asking for OEM parts.
So let me understand this. So the legislation in the state of Rhode Island it now states that if the consumer requests in writing OEM parts, whether they're insured or claim it, they can get OEM parts for up to 72 months, which is 6 years from the manufacturer date.
Correct.
Is that accurate, Randy?
Yes, that is.
So Randy, it almost sounds too good to be true. Talk to me about this law and how you guys got it passed.
The first law was the heavy lift was done with that one. And that one was passed through the Autobody Association, myself, other board members, and we brought some aftermarket parts to the State House and had the factory part as well as the aftermarket part to literally do a show and tell for them to pass around and see the difference between the parts that we were talking about. And that really hit home. And then when we showed that car manufacturers were mandating that they wanted their vehicles repaired with OEM parts, specifically if they had leases, that really showed the legislators where there was a problem. So you would have somebody, for instance, had a Nissan, the vehicle was fixed, and they might have used a bunch of imitation parts on it. And now when they went to turn the car back in and it was re-inspected and somebody found that had all these aftermarket parts on it, they had the contractual right to charge the customer back for all the parts that were on it that were aftermarket if it was a leased vehicle. So once they saw that this could literally put consumers in harm's way and saw the inferior work that was coming out from the aftermarket part companies, the legislators ultimately saw our way and they passed the law for consumer protection. And recently it was changed where they updated it to make it even longer due to the length of time that people are owning vehicles as well as how long it takes to pay for them. You know, going back when that law was first passed, which I believe goes back 15 years ago, the expense of a car was probably 30-40% less than it is today. So with the expense going up on the cars,
so Randy, let me ask this question. So again, the legislation got passed, consumer, as long as they request it in writing. So how does the process work? Does the consumer take and do they submit the request to the insurance carrier through the body shop, or they have to, or is there a form they got to fill out, or how exactly does the consumer request all OEM parts from the insurance carrier?
Most of the shops have their own form. That way the customer can just sign them requesting that they want OEM parts on it, and it becomes part of the documentation that's turned into the appraiser when they come out to look at the vehicle.
Okay, so now let me shift gears a little bit. Something else I loved about your legislation is it talks about the amount of time that an insurance carrier can take to come out and re-inspect the vehicle. Because I got to tell you, listen, if I was with everybody right now in person, I would say if you have an insurance company that's taken weeks, days, weeks, and even months to come out and re-inspect a vehicle, would you give me a loud amen? Everyone would say amen. So Randy, What is the legislation in Rhode Island in regards to the time frame that an insurance company has to come out and inspect a vehicle? And what happens if they don't come out within that certain amount of time?
Early on, the laws were passed where they were allowed 3 days to come out on an original estimate and 4 days to come out on a supplement request. But we found that they often would not adhere to that, and they would take much longer. And as you just said, we would turn into situations where it would take weeks for them to come out. So last year, we went to the legislators and asked them to enforce this by adding to the law that says in the event that they don't meet that criteria that they're supposed to be meeting, then they lose the right to inspect the vehicle. And that has certainly been a game changer. Now, if they don't adhere to that time frame, then they lose the right to inspect the car. So we're finding the insurance companies have definitely stepped way up on their efforts to get here in time to look at the cars.
Okay, and now let's shift gears again. What is the amount of time that they have? I just want to be real clear on this so I understand it. What's the amount of time? Let's say I disassemble a vehicle. I notify an insurance carrier. I need a reinspection. What's the amount of time that they have to come out? What is that time frame again?
So they're getting 3 days on an original and 4 days on a supplement.
So if they don't come out within 4 days, what is it that I, as a collision repair, what are my options if they don't come out within 4 days?
Send them your estimate and ask them to review your estimate. We find most of the times that if they do actually come out to negotiate it after the timeframe's passed, they're much more agreeable because they know that they've lost their opportunity to inspect the car. So at that point, they're working off of your sheet and your photographs to look at the claim.
Okay, gotcha. Now let's shift gears to another thing that I really loved about your legislation, and that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you have some verbiage in there that says if it says recommended, it means the same thing as required or something along those lines? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if I was here in person with you and I said, how many of you have had an insurance carrier say they will not, put something on an estimate because it says recommended versus required? You all would say, amen, brother Mike, amen. But y'all addressed that in your legislation. Is that right, Randy?
We did. Going back, I think it was about 4 years ago, we had gotten legislation passed that mandated that insurers paid for the necessary procedures to repair a vehicle. But just as you said, the problem we were coming up against was that a lot of Asian manufacturers only said that they recommend, and they didn't say that they require a bunch of the procedures. So we had done some research on it, and we're told that in the Asian culture, especially, they won't say required. They always say recommended. So we changed the legislation. So now it says that they have to pay for procedures that are recommended or required by both the car manufacturer as well as the paint companies as well.
And it actually says that in your legislation, correct?
Yes, it does. Yep.
Yes. So let me share a little insights on this whole recommended versus required thing. So we at Collision Advice, as many of you know, we are very blessed with the opportunity that we get to do a lot of training for a variety of different OEM manufacturers, right? Such as Toyota, Lexus, Nissan, Infiniti, and et cetera, right? And understand that all the views that I am sharing and presenting today are the views of Mike Anderson, Collision Advice, no other entity that maybe we do training for. So with that disclaimer said, what was educated to me is that in the Asian culture, and I say Asian because you have the Japanese and Koreans, right? That there are basically two different ways of asking you to do something. There's a polite way and there's a kind of a rude or disrespectful way, right? So in the Asian culture, that if someone says, hey, you're required to do this, it's kind of viewed upon as and frowned upon as being condescending and disrespectful. Versus if they say, I recommend you do this, it's like the polite way of asking. Again, I'm not here to talk about that. If you were to actually Google that or you look that up, you actually would find out there's like two different forms: polite way, a respectful way versus a disrespectful way, or kind of condescending. And that's kind of why they use that language. Now, Sheryl, let's jump into Randy. I want to jump into my co-host here, Sheryl Driggers, for a moment. So stay with me, Randy, right? So Sheryl Driggers, Sheryl used to own some shops in Florida. She joined our Collision Advice team. And one of the things that Sheryl is like a really big consumer advocate. And Sheryl, on behalf of Collision Advice, actually flew out to Illinois, and she partnered with one of our friends and clients, Tim Papp, that owns Papp Autobody. And one of the things that Sheryl did is Sheryl went to Papp Autobody, and what they did is they invited in consumers who, number one, had their vehicles fixed at Papp Autobody. They actually invited some consumers who got steered to go to another shop, and they invited some consumers that to pay out of pocket. So basically, Sheryl brought these consumers in, and she basically talked to them about the whole repair process. Like, what made you choose Papp? What made you not choose Papp and go to another shop that the insurance company pushed you towards? Or what made you decide to pay out of pocket? And Sheryl asked them a variety of questions. And one of the things, Sheryl, that you talk to consumers about, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so just chime in here anytime, was really about consumers' thoughts regarding OEM versus aftermarket parts, or consumers' thoughts in regards, whether they should have to pay out of pocket for things like safety inspections. But Sheryl, listening to the legislation that Randy and all the other great shop owners in Rhode Island have passed, what are your thoughts on that, Sheryl, from a consumer perspective, and based on your experience, Sheryl, of going and doing these customer focus groups on behalf of shops?
Absolutely. So, my experience and hearing from customers in these customer focus groups is that they can't believe that it's even a question, right? Of that OEM parts wouldn't be paid for, that safety inspections wouldn't be paid for. And so the legislation that I'm learning about and I've learned about over the last week as I've been preparing for this call, I think I hope states from around the country are tuning in. And Randy, I would love to talk to you about how other states can, really learn from what you've done in Rhode Island to be able to facilitate that in the states that are just forming associations, like the state of Florida. I know the state of Colorado. Those are new associations that, we're really looking to bring legislation to our state capital that can do the same thing for our state that you've done. And so I had a couple of questions, if that's okay, Mike and Randy.
Please, jump right in there, Cheryl.
Just in regards to consumer, what has been the initial feedback for consumers since you guys have passed this law?
The cornerstone of everything that we've done as an association actually hinges on the consumer. As shop owners, what happens throughout the entire country is every shop owner that cares about the quality of the repairs that they do, we wind up taking on the battle with the insurance companies head on. And the consumers are in the background and don't even realize it. And that's right to your point where you said that consumers are shocked. Well, the reason they're shocked is that most shops don't put the customer in the middle. They're at the forefront of this. So as we drafted legislation and tried to solve problems in the industry, the customer was the one that we were focusing on. Because honestly, you've got higher profit margins on aftermarket parts than you have on OEM. And it's less expensive and more profitable to fix a car incorrectly than it is to fix it correctly and follow the OEM procedures. So the stuff that we put forward is keeping the consumer absolutely front of mind with the things that we do. So, asking for the original parts to be put on the car, asking that all the repair procedures be adhered to. All of these things go hand in hand with helping the consumers out. And the consumers have definitely caught on. They are definitely aware of it. We went from being an association that, wasn't well known, where now in the state, if you say the Autobody Association, people know who we are, and they know it because as people have gotten cars repaired in shops, we just ask that they inform the consumers to say, you're getting OEM parts because of the law passed by the Autobody Association. Or if your car is a total loss, you're getting paid the full market value of the vehicle plus the sales tax you would have lost because of a law the Autobody passed. So all of these things that we've done, we've tried to make sure that the consumers become aware of it. And it's definitely grown where we went from being, obscure to now people actually know who we are because of the laws that we've passed, because it touches everybody. Everybody knows somebody that got in an accident and had their car repaired. And if you went into a shop and they mentioned, hey, you're getting this because of the Autobody Association, you tend to remember that.
So real quick, Cheryl, jump in there. So Randy, does the consumer have to request OEM parts before they file, right after they file a claim, or can they do it at any time through the process? Like, when does the consumer have to make that request?
They don't have to make the request if the vehicle is less than 48 months. If it's 48 months or newer, they're going to get that automatically.
Okay,
it's only if the vehicle goes over 48 months, then they'd have to make the request in writing. And again, the time would be at the shop when they're having the vehicle brought into the shop to be diagnosed.
Absolutely. Back to you, Cheryl.
So, Randy, another question. Have you noticed any impact on repair timelines? So,
Absolutely. Right. Hand in hand with what Mike said. The reason for an increase in the number of hours that you're seeing on an average is because of the repair inspections that we're being compensated for. The frame time, it takes longer to set the cars up when you're actually adhering to the procedures that you're supposed to be doing. So all those repair times that you're seeing are a direct result of the legislation. Without the legislation, we just honestly couldn't get it. We went to the legislators with these problems in order to solve something that we couldn't solve on our own, because if we could have solved it in the shop, obviously we would have, but you can't. When you have somebody who looks at things and says, well, they recommend that, we're not going to pay for it, or them saying, well, I don't see a need for it. How do you combat that?
So Cheryl, again, I'll kind of tag team off you here, Cheryl, but where you brought me up here, Randy, was like, let's talk about right to appraisal, because there's a lot of states where, if the consumer, the insurance company and the shop don't agree, the consumer can get, each side can get, like an arbitrator or, to try to work it out. If they can, it goes to umpire. But we know that a few insurance companies in the United States have removed that right to appraisal clause from their policies, right? And we also know that Texas is really trying to push some legislation, praise God for Robert McDormand, right? But he's down there and they're trying to fight the fight to try to get that introduced back in there. So, again, and when we talk about insurance companies, I'm not anti-insurance, right? I'm pro-consumer. And to me, if the consumer doesn't have a path to redemption or a path or a way to, it's kind of like the judicial system in the United States of America, right? Like they got to have a way to be able to get, treated fairly. And so for you guys, I want to make sure I understand this. Are there any insurance carriers in the state of Rhode Island that can remove the appraisal clause from their policy?
No. First of all, when it comes to the appraisal provision, it's part of a policy. So it only applies to people who are insured. If you're a claimant, you don't have that right. And we started to use that provision on people who were insured and realized when we had claimants, we were at a big disadvantage because now if there was a disagreement, like you just said, we had nowhere to go.
So wait. So you're telling me in Rhode Island, a claimant can utilize an appraisal clause?
Now they can because of the legislation we passed. So we passed legislation, so it's law. So it doesn't matter what they have in their policy. It's law that there's going to be an appraisal process in the event that there's a disagreement, whether you're an insured or whether you're a claimant. So now it's leveled the playing field. So we don't just have a path on an insurance claim. We have a path on an insured or a claimant's.
Or a claimant. Back to you, Sheryl. Man.
Yeah, I know, right? Smoking. So that leads me to my thought process of what advice would you give to shops in other states that might be advocating for laws, maybe just now starting in their association? What advice would you give those people? The
advice I would give them that, number one, it is unquestionably a worthwhile effort for them to try to come up with legislation to help repair the problems within the industry. Number one. Number two, don't look for a magic bullet because it does not exist. You're not going to miraculously come up with one thing that's going to solve all the problems. You have to be willing to invest a lot of your own time, a lot of effort, and surround yourself with a core group of good people who are dedicated to trying to elevate the industry. You can get it done, but it's going to take commitment. I've seen too many times that people will ask our opinion or advice on how we accomplish things, and I'll tell them. And then after they have one legislative session that they don't get success out of it, they're like, oh, this is too difficult. I'm not going to do it. And I can tell you it doesn't work that way because in the beginning, I think we lobbied, I believe it was for 4 years before we got the first aftermarket part law passed. And that was, I call it my baby because that was the one that that was just mine. I was focusing on that. And it took 4 years, to get up there and learn the politics and what's going to come out from the other side. And the two things you're always going to hear from the insurance industry is, well, it's going to drive up the cost of premium, so everybody's going to be paying more money. And the second threat is always, if it gets too high, we're just going to leave the state. So they terrorize all the legislators into thinking that if they do this, it's going to lead to problems for consumers, and insurance companies are just going to leave the state and so on. And it's just an empty threat because at the end of the day, they need to sell insurance to make money, and premiums, truthfully, are going up anyway. So that's just a reality that's been going on for a long time. Obviously, it's been pushed even more so in the more recent years, but consumers are entitled to get what they had on the car when they got into the accident. It, to me, is insane to say, okay, you get an accident and now we're going to give you something that's far inferior and that's good enough. It's just not right. It's one thing if the customer chooses it. It's another thing to have an insurance company mandated upon them. So shops that are considering moving forward legislation know that it's going to take some time. It's going to take effort. It's going to take money. You're going to need to do those things, but it is worth it in the long run when you can do something that's going to help the consumers and it's going to help the industry.
Yeah, so if we can share the screen for just a moment, if we can, please. I just want to show a screenshot here of this is the document that covers the right to appraisal clause. Is that correct, Randy?
Yeah, that's correct. Right, so that's actually a whole new law that we wrote and put in there showing a pathway, which all we did was take the existing provisions of a appraisal clause in a contract and made it a law, and we called it the motor vehicle appraisal provision. And then we tightened up the timelines on it because from past experience, we learned that certain insurance companies would just let them sit there and do nothing with them because there was no consequence to it. So you'll see that we've tried to tighten the whole process up to a couple weeks, so that from choosing your appraiser to choosing an umpire, it needs to get worked out within a couple weeks so that a decision's rendered and cars can move on.
Let's go to the next slide, Tracy, if we can, please. One moment. I want to pull up another one here. I'm going to go down. Let's continue on. Go to the next slide right here, Tracy. Hold right there for a minute. And I want to go to number 19 and number 20. Modifying any published manual, Motors Auto Repair Manual, Mitchell's, or any automated appraisal system. And then number 20, failing to use a manual or system in its entirety in the appraisal of a motor vehicle. So in the entirety. Number 21 talks about paint materials invoicing. Anything you can share with us in regards to that material invoicing?
Yeah, the material invoice, became a problem with us, as I'm sure it has in every state. And as a result, we again went to the legislators on this to show that the compensation for paint material, when you base it on paint hours, has no basis of science when you're painting vehicles that have 3-stage, 4-stage refinishes in them. If you're doing a lot of body work on the vehicle, your costs are going to go up. And so by showing them this and showing them that there are ways to actually calculate things properly, they recognize it to be a problem, and they passed the law so that now insurance companies have to pay based upon a refinished material program, whether it's from the paint company, whether it's from Mitchell, a few other ones are listed in there, so that we're not just accepting this arbitrary, here's dollars times paint hours.
Yes. So now I'm going to number 26. And this is the one that talks about failure to perform an initial appraisal within 3 business days after request is received from an auto body repair shop, provided the damaged motor vehicles on the premises of the repair shop, et cetera, et cetera. This is the one that talks about that the insurer will forfeit its right to inspect the vehicle. Now, a lot of people will say, Randy and Mike, this is, and Cheryl, this sounds fine and dandy, but how do you enforce this? Like, how do you make them, how do you make somebody comply with this? Or, again, how's that work?
Really don't have to enforce it. It's the law, and it's saying that in the event that they don't come out in time to look at the vehicle, that they lose their right to inspect the vehicle. So you're literally kind of putting the ball back in their court to say, okay, you still have this claim to settle. You certainly can't just walk away from it, but now you've lost the ability to look at it.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Troy, we can unshare that screen again. Cheryl, what other questions did you have for Randy before I shift gears with him a little bit?
Yeah, one more question about consumers. Have you seen any challenges of educating your consumers about their rights under this law?
Yeah, the challenges obviously are that people are not going to be versed in accidents and collision repair until they're actually involved in an accident. So it takes some public awareness campaigns, and it takes the shops that care enough to make sure that consumers are aware of this information. And that's what we try to do. And again, it's taken a long time. It's taken years, and I don't want to deceive anybody into thinking that this is hey, we can take care of all these problems in a matter of 1 or 2 years. This took, what you're looking at here took well over 15 years to get there. But as some of the people at the State House that represent the insurance companies used to say, they referred to it as death by 1,000 cuts, because we would just keep going for one problem after another, and these little things all add up to what you see is our Unfair Claims Settlement Practices Act. And it completely changed the way that things get handled now, because you have the laws that are actually narrowing them in on how things are going to be handled. And it definitely made things a lot better for the shops as well as the consumers, because at the end of the day, the consumer is the one that matters. And all of these things that are in here are designed to help speed up the repair process, stop the things that they use to slow down claims, that give them a pathway to solve the problems, to make sure that they're getting compensated for all the necessary repair procedures and inspections and so on, which they all would have just expected to be the case. But when, again, you're not involved in an accident, average once every 7 years or so, people just don't know about that. So as shop owners and as an association, we do try to educate them. So we have our website, we put information out there. From time to time, we'll do a limited amount of marketing with it. And we rely on our core member shops to let the consumers know about their rights and how they got them. And it definitely spread, and it definitely works.
So Randy, let me ask you another question before we maybe move on to something else. So obviously, I've heard the saying, you got to pay to play. And as somebody that was involved with the Washington Metropolitan Autobody Association and the Virginia Automotive Legislative Committee, as a shop owner, you've got to pony up and can make contributions. Like, you've got to play the political game if you want these things to happen. So first of all, knowing you, and you've always been very humble and very kind to me, I'm sure there's some others within your association, your state, that maybe we should give a shout out to just for supporting and helping you on this. So anybody real quickly that you want to give a shout out to that maybe helped you with this?
There's a long list of people to give a shout out to. Probably the first person would be the prior president / vice president, John Petrarca from Providence Autobody. He's somebody who was hugely instrumental in helping to educate us and set us on a pathway to accomplishing this. Tom Casal from Casal's Autobody is hugely important. Every guy that we have on the board, which, I've got David Hayes, I've got Kyle Rocher, I've got.
So basically, it's not just you. You're not a one-man band. Randy didn't do all this by himself. There were several others. And then what about campaign contributions? Like, how important is it? What do you got to do to get the politicians to be open-minded and listen to what you're trying to do for the consumer? Did you get consumers to show up with you in these discussions? How did you drive the whole legislative process?
Well, first, let me just say that without all the guys that I have around me on the board, I could accomplish absolutely nothing. To be completely transparent, single-handedly, I would accomplish nothing. It takes all of these guys. It's all of our collective efforts that get this done. And we achieved it by bringing in consumers, showing actual situations where the consumers are harmed, to have them to help testify against I don't want to say underhanded, but the problematic claim process. So when the legislators heard it from the consumers, it definitely hit home. And the other thing is, when it comes to dealing with legislators in Rhode Island specifically, we have part-time legislators. So these people all have full-time jobs, and then they go and do, their legislative work as something that is on the side. And you can't expect them to be an expert on everything. And they have people come up every year looking for laws on different things. So whether it's somebody coming up for something to do with daycare, or somebody that wants a law passed to do with, ride sharing and so on, land deals, they have all this stuff put in front of them. And there's only so much time that they can spend to learn about it. So you have to be willing to go to their fundraisers when they have them and get that face time where you can get 15, 30 minutes of their time one-on-one to educate them about what the issue is and how you'd like to solve it. Because once the legislative sessions start and they're up there, they don't have time to talk to you. They're literally reviewing hundreds of bills that are coming their way.
You got to make it easy for them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's what
nice,
comes down
to the point, and easy, right?
Exactly.
Well, Randy, listen, I appreciate you so much. I'm sorry to cut you off. We always want to like this is our first podcast, man. You are our first guest ever. So thank you so much. And because we want to allow the last 15 minutes to answer some questions that were submitted in advance. But Randy, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, wanted to talk to you, or get a copy of your legislation, is there a place that you can direct them to, sir?
Absolutely. I direct them right to Mike Anderson. Everybody can call him. He's got all my contact information.
Yeah, reach out to me and we can get you a copy of the legislation. So absolutely, we'll run interference for you on that, Randy. And listen, I want you to know I've personally been to Randy's shop. He is 100% dedicated to doing right by the consumer. I love one of the things at Randy's shop, and what our goal, just, on the road with Mike Anderson, our goal is eventually to take this on the road, and we broadcast live from a shop. So I'm sitting there with Randy, but they got a bunch of snow dumped on them this weekend. So we were afraid we couldn't get up there, but Randy has this really cool kiosk in his lobby area, and he really does a lot of things to educate the consumer on that kiosk. But Randy, I just want you to know, man, how much we love you and appreciate you being our very first guest. And I hope if we asked you back, you would consider coming back, my brother.
I would absolutely come back, and I'm absolutely honored to be your first guest, Mike. Of all the people in the industry that you could have chosen, I'm honored that you chose me, and I would be more than happy to help you or anybody in any state that wants any help with any directive with legislative efforts. I have already spoken with the guys in Florida, a good group of guys down there, and a couple of other states as well. And I definitely would like to encourage them to try and take these steps to, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You take a look at what we've done, and it actually makes it a lot easier, because a lot of the things that we didn't exist. And it's very difficult for a legislator to go out on that limb and say, well, we're going to pass a law that nobody's had in the entire country. That's tough. But when you can say, hey, look, there was a problem in Rhode Island, that exists in our state, and look what they did, and this took care of that problem. That's a lot easier for legislators to look at and say, okay, well, if it worked there, then we should give it a shot over here as well. So I'd be happy to help anybody.
Thanks, Randy. We appreciate you, man. And Troy, we're going to let him go ahead and get backstage. And again, Randy, Sheryl, let's just give a big round of applause from you and I. And thank Randy so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that we actually wanted this podcast to represent is we don't want to just get on here, Sheryl and I, and talk for the sake of talking. We want this to be a podcast that is important to you as listeners. And that's why we want you to submit your questions to us, and then we will address your questions. In addition, the name of it, as many of you that know me, I'm on the road over 300 days a year. That's why I came up with the name On the Road with Mike Anderson, serving up some collision advice, thanks to our teammate, Maria Quintero. So shout out to Maria, right? But one of the goals is that we'd like to do moving forward is actually do this podcast live on the road at shops around the country. So if your shop is doing something that's unique, your shop's doing something cool with consumers, you got a really bad repair in your shop, you're like, man, the whole world should know about this, or you're doing something, again, that's just really awesome. Listen, reach out to us, because we want to take this show on the road, and we're going to come to you and broadcast live. I will tell you that our next podcast is actually going to be live from a shop called Wallace Collision, a gentleman's name by the name of John Baker, and we're going to talk about safety inspections. Tracy, if we could advance that, and we're going to share the slide here as to when the next date and time of this podcast is, and then we're going to get to some questions that were submitted in advance. So one moment, and right here, if we can share the screen, please, Troy. Our next webinar, before we get to questions here in a moment, don't go nowhere yet, is going to be all things safety inspections. We're going to broadcast this live, taking the show on the road. Every month, the show will be live after this one here. And it's going to be live from Wallace Collision Center with John Baker and a gentleman by the name of Jace. John Baker at Wallace Collision Center, they have a full-time dedicated technician who does nothing but safety inspections. Removes every steering column when needed and measures it. Removes the steering gear and inspects it. The seat belts. So we're going to do live demonstrations, assuming my tech guru, Tracy, can help me get that part figured out. So you're not going to want to miss that live on March 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern. But with that said, Sheryl, I know some people submitted some questions in the beginning. Prior to this, can you throw a couple of those questions at me? And let's see if you and I can answer those questions.
Absolutely. So we've got some great questions today. I'm going to start with the first one from Roxanne over in Orlando, Florida. She says, good morning, Mr. Anderson. Do you feel as if the current election and the changes in tariffs is going to be something that may cause issues or delays, or vice versa? Will it be something that may help the industry as far as locating parts?
So it's funny you asked that, because I literally was at CIC, I guess a week or two ago, and I actually was talking to several OEM manufacturers about that. And the first thing that I think is important to understand is what countries those tariffs were placed upon, right? Initially out of the gate, I believe President Trump said Mexico, China, and Canada. Tracy's off screen. She'll keep me straight if I get that wrong. But I believe it was those three countries, right? Mexico, China, and Canada. Now, when we talk about aftermarket parts, it's my understanding that most aftermarket, I didn't say all, but most aftermarket parts are actually manufactured in Taiwan or South Korea. Those countries don't have tariffs levied against them, right? So I don't think it's going to impact those aftermarket providers. Right now, a lot of your OEM parts actually are manufactured in Mexico. And so I believe we could see that, tariffs affect the price of OEM parts, which unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong, but unfortunately might see an increased use of aftermarket or salvage, LKQ, whatever the right, recycled. I think that's the politically correct term, recycled parts, right? To be, utilized more in estimates because they're not, they're kind of exempt from tariffs. So I absolutely believe the tariffs are going to play an issue in regards to parts pricing. I also saw in the news President Trump talking about some tariffs on some of the steel manufacturers, or steel, companies in that nature. So I think the whole tariff game. Now, again, you just saw when President Trump came out the gate, and it's not like I have inside knowledge or anything, but we quickly saw where one or two of those countries, they said, we're going to suspend this for 30 days. I think in Mexico, they sent a bunch of troops to the border and they said, we're going to suspend this for 30 days. So I think don't panic yet. Let's sit back. Let's see what happens. But I absolutely do believe the tariffs will absolutely impact our industry 1000%. I also think that could increase the price of vehicles being imported and sold into the country. So therefore, that could also affect the price of salvage, right? And maybe total losses. So short answer is yes, I believe tariffs will impact that. I also believe those tariffs could impact the supply chain, which could also affect, cycle times, et cetera. So thank you so much for your question. If I didn't answer it to your satisfaction, please feel free to reach back out to me personally and I will call you. So let's go ahead. What's the next question, please, Sheryl?
Absolutely. So the next question is a consumer question. It's from someone in the industry about consumers. And he says, consumers are increasingly being burdened with higher deductibles, insufficient rental, and many now are being asked to fight over or cover repair costs their insurer denies. Even if the vehicle is properly repaired, they still take a huge financial hit with trade-in diminished value. For years, all of the claim stakeholders have debated this conundrum without offering real solutions. Are you aware of any new innovative solutions that could build customer loyalty and help the consumer be prepared for these unexpected expenses?
Yes, yes, and yes. So it's so funny that question was sent in because one of the things that I became aware of, and Tracy and I both, is was it called Guardsman, Tracy? Guardsman, and it is a supplemental insurance. Think about like Aflac for your health insurance, right? Aflac supplements that. So it's called Guardsman Insurance, and it's a policy that consumers can buy sold through F&I departments of dealerships, or even I know some body shop clients right now that actually sell this to the consumers or offer it. They're not in the insurance business. There's somebody that underwrites it, right? This Guardsman. But what it does is it's where the consumer can buy gap insurance on their vehicle in case, for example, it is a total loss. Or they can buy diminished value insurance. So the vehicle had repairs. They went to turn it on a lease and it dinged them as a leaseholder, that they could get insurance on that. They also can buy insurance on OEM only parts, that if the insurance company, insured or claim it, they only want to pay for aftermarket or recycled parts, this consumer could buy a policy that would reimburse them for the difference in OEM parts. So I can tell you that I'm hearing more and more of these types of services being offered. I also believe in the future, listen, let's talk about the elephant in the room and in the industry. The current price matching, conquest, price strategy, that is broken in the collision repair industry, Sheryl, right? The way people, price match parts today, I'm telling you right now, it's killing the wholesale parts department at the dealership, retailers. It's killing their margins. If they don't turn that model around, wholesalers are going to go out of business and you're not going to be able to get every part aftermarket or recycled. And that's not going to be good for any stakeholder. The insurance companies, if you're listening right now, I'm telling you, you're being very short-sighted in your goals and request of these alternative parts. And you need to look at it long-term, because the stakeholders, mean the OEMs, are really not the OEM manufacturer, but the dealers that sell the parts are real. And I'm going off on a tangent, but they're hurting, right? They're really hurting. So I believe that the current price matching model is broken. And I believe that buying these gap insurance or, additional like AFLAC type policies solve those problems. So whoever asked that question, great question. Tracy and I, actually my team, Tracy and I, we were just in a meeting for 2 hours today with some representatives from that company. So your question could be more timely.
Fantastic, Mike. So another question that came in, this one I believe is from a technician. So they are asking, what is your view on painting panels, even on the most difficult type of customers, whether it's pearl white, for an example? He's in constant battle at the current shop trying to get blend time for certain jobs. As a painter, I don't understand why management or writers can write a ticket for the same exact color, but on one ticket they get blend time, on the other they say, oh, we aren't blending because they're of a little scratch or dent on the panel that needs blending. So
as a painter, first of all, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, because you as a painter should not be having to deal with that, right? I got some things right now, you guys know I got Tourette's, some crazy things come out of my mouth. So right now I'm having to just lock my mouth down, because I don't want to say what my brain is thinking. But first of all, if you take an ICAR, class, you take one of our estimating classes, you take something from Collision Hub, you take something from the paint manufacturers, the saying is tend to achieve a blendable match. Tend to achieve a blendable match, not tend to paint panel to panel, right? Listen, I understand that everybody wants to keep as much of the material on the vehicle as they can and not disrupt the factory coating. I get that. I love it. I appreciate it. But at the end of the day, some of these colors are a challenge, right? So it's tend to achieve a blendable match. So my question or comment back to you for the painter that submitted that, he or she, thank you for the question, number one. Number two, I will tell you that you need to make sure that your estimators listen to this podcast and tell them to reach out to me so we can help them, right? It's tend to achieve a blendable match, not tend to achieve a panel-to-panel match. And at the end of the day, listen, sometimes the long way is the short way, right? I mean, you could spend countless hours trying to tint a vehicle, still not get it 100% right, even with all the technology and all the color cameras, and end up having to redo it or end up with unhappy customers. So listen, blend it. You got to blend it. I don't care if it's a horizontal panel, a vertical panel. Yes, there are those, painters that are exceptional and content, but, again, tend to achieve a blendable match. That's what I'm going to say. And you should understand blend time too. Make sure you look at the study done by SCRS that it takes more time to blend a panel than it does to paint a new undamaged panel. Again, that's a conversation for another day.
All right, so I know we're getting close on time. I've got another question. This one is asking, Mike, what are a few pieces of advice you can offer shops to make the process smoother in working with non-DRP insurers?
So, there's a lot of consultants out there and a lot of great consultants, right? And so at the end of the day, one thing that I believe most consultants, including myself, or even consumer advocates or successful shops would tell you is, it all starts with getting the consumer on your side. You've got to have the consumer on your side. That's just the number one solution. Number one is you've got to get the consumer on your side. Number two, competence leads to confidence. I see a lot. I got to tell you, 90% of people that I see that leave stuff off the estimate, I mean this in love, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but 90% of the people, Sheryl, that leave things off of an estimate, they try to blame the insurance company for their lack of knowledge or their lack of just knowledge or ignorance, right? And they try to blame the insurance. Well, the insurance will never pay for that. The reality is they don't know how to explain it. They don't know how to justify it. And I know some of you are saying, well, Mike, I know how to justify it, but when I upload it, all they do is just look at the estimate, change it, and send it back with no conversation. That's why, again, we got to get that customer on our side, right? So number one is be knowledgeable, understand, what you're looking for. Also, I will tell you that, copying and including the consumer in any email correspondence, right? Again, this is if you're a non-DRP, obviously, right? I understand there's two different business models there, right? So I totally get that. So my question would be educating the consumer. Educating the consumer and getting them involved in the process is going to be your best course. But I will also say this, right? at the end of the day, make sure also, because, you know, consumers don't want this stress, right? Do everything you can to try to present your request in a very clear, concise, and very documented set. So that's what I would say. Get the consumer involved. Also, just don't, you know, and again, I want to make sure you understand, I'm not anti-insurance. I think there's good shops. I think there's bad shops. I think there's good carriers that pay for things. There's bad carriers, right? There's good DRP shops, bad DRP. I mean, I see them all across the board, right? So I've learned a long time ago not to judge people in this one swath. But what I will say is, again, it all starts with getting the consumer on your side, and an educated consumer absolutely can help to make things easier.
Absolutely. And I know one thing you taught us over the years, and it's a quote I remember from you probably 10 years ago, is educate, don't alienate. Of when it comes to, so if insurers are coming into the shop and you can take them out to the cars and educate, I know that's one of the things that you taught us that worked wonders in when we were dealing with non-DRP insurance companies.
Yeah, and I go back to the whole thing with the question, because I want to make sure that I answer the question for that shop that submitted it. Again, as we try to wrap this up, is again, you just communicate with the consumer. Every time you notify the insurance carrier or third-party payer that you're in need of additional items, you know, let the consumer know, keep them involved, right? You know, and I always said that I'll make 2 good faith attempts with a third-party payer to get an agreed price. Some cases I may even make a third, depends on the situation, right? But also I can say to defend insurance companies, they don't want to see, you know, supplement after supplement after supplement. They pay you what you want, and then you have 2 or 3 other supplements. So again, Lee, please, it's really difficult to answer some of these questions in just a couple minutes, Lee, but reach out to me personally, and I will make sure that I reach out to you. So Tracy, can we go to the last slide, please? That has our Tiffany's email address and phone numbers on it. And if we can just share the screen there again, please, Troy. And listen, if I didn't get to your question, email Tiffany directly. If I didn't answer your question to your satisfaction, email my teammate Tiffany directly. Give her your phone number, and I will personally call you or a member of my team. But listen, again, March 10th, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is going to be our next webinar. It's going to be live broadcast. And if your shop's doing something really cool, you want us to come to your shop, broadcast live, and show the world what you're doing, or you'd like to be a guest on here, or maybe you're a stakeholder in the industry and you feel like you're misunderstood, right? Maybe you're an insurance company or a scan tool company, you know what I'm saying? And you feel misunderstood, come on our show. Let's clear the air. So Sheryl, any last comments from you?
No, it was amazing. Thank you for letting me sit on your first podcast. It was an absolute honor and pleasure.
All right. Well, listen, thank you, Autobody News, for helping us to promote this. We love you. We appreciate you. And we'll see you again next month on the road with Mike Anderson and Sheryl Driggers serving up some collision advice. Take care, y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.